So more so than usual, this is going to be a very impromptu tutorial because apparently Blender has added a tracking feature that somehow I didn't know about. Usually I'm very on the pulse when it comes to these tracking features, not this one. So I want to talk about this new thing, which is called, what's it called? It's called average tracks. At some point, I just noticed this thing existed. I think it's like a 2.93 edition. And you can see I was working on this one file here. I'll give a bit of a spoiler. It's a CG Matter video, but you can see I'm taking this iPod and kind of leaving behind duplicate traces of it. And well, whatever. The point is I needed a 3D camera solve for this shot. So I was tracking and I noticed, what the fuck? There's something called average track. So I was messing around with it and here's what I learned. So average tracks is a new feature that does exactly what it says. It takes trackers, whether it be 2 trackers, 3 trackers, however many, you could just have any linear combination, and it will average its X and Y coordinates. And we'll talk about why that's useful. So, for example, let's say we take 2 trackers. Again, I've already done the tracking for this shot. It's pretty much done. This is just for getting extra information. Let's say I select 2 trackers. So I'm clicking, shift clicking, I have 2 trackers selected. If I click average trackers, it's going to create a new tracker in some sense in the midpoint between these. If you were to imagine a 2D line here and we were to average out their X and Y coordinates, this is at the midpoint. And you can see this tracker is now in between these. It doesn't really add any new information because, again, it's just the average of these two. It's not independent. So it's what we'd call linearly dependent, but you can see it's at a new location, which is actually useful information, okay? Fine, so let's say we have this tracker. Just like any other tracker, you can trim the beginning, the end. So I'm just gonna trim the end here and lock this as a new tracker. What we can do with this is we can actually include it into our solve without recalculating anything. So for example, with this new tracker, I'm gonna take the weight, I'm gonna bring it to 0, so I wanna resolve this so it actually shows up here, but I don't want this to have any contribution. I've made tracking tutorials before, just know that when I say weight is 0 means it's 0 influence, I mean it, okay? We're going to take it, we're going to resolve this, not trying to calculate anything new, solve camera motion, and you can see this new empty was added. So I'm just going to do that again. So here's the before, we have all these trackers here, I made them empties. Let's solve again, and now we get this new one. Again, it doesn't change the solve or anything, but now if we needed to know exactly where this location is, we have that information. Okay, fine, you're thinking that's kind of useful, but not a big deal. Here's where it starts getting crazy. So first of all, you can average trackers like I showed you, but you can also take averages of averages. So what do I mean? I'm going to take this new average tracker we made, plus this one, and just like that, we can average these trackers. So yes, we can make an average of an average, although do know that the endpoints of the track of these, so you can see it's getting a bit chaotic here, sometimes that gets a bit weird once you take averages of averages, I've just found. But the point is, you can kind of recursively do this forever, which means any point between these 2 trackers, the original 2, if you were to just imagine a line in between these, we could put in a tracker anywhere we want, because we can take an average of an average, etc. Okay, so already that's crazy. 2 trackers now gives you a full line of information, which is something we didn't have before. Additionally, you can take an average of sets that are larger than 2 trackers. So for example, I'm going to take these 4. So before we were talking about a tracker that kind of occupied the line in between these 2. Now we're talking about a tracker that goes inside the area of this quadrilateral. So I'm selecting all 4. Average trackers, you can see again, there's a bit of messed up stuff at the endpoints. This is because, by the way, one of the trackers goes away. So hopefully there's going to be a patch where the linear combination, the weights of those things are updated once one of the contributors is gone. But for now, whatever, we could just trim it before. Now we have a tracker that in some sense, kind of like a planar track, it's stuck to the surface of the average of these 4 trackers. So it's kind of like inside this quadrilateral, okay? So yes, we can now put trackers inside areas. You can have an arbitrary number of trackers and average them. So in this case, it's kind of used like a planar track because we have 4 of them, and you can imagine a planar surface, whatever. Just like last time, we can lock this. We can turn down the weight. By the way, you can have weight set to 0 and then do average tracks. That way we don't have to do it every time. Again, solve, recalculate, and now we have a new point. And this is actually useful because if you wanted a bunch of points along the surface, because you wanted to say, oh, here's where some action should happen and here's where another should happen, you can do that, okay? So something very important I just want to emphasize, because there really isn't too much to this. You just average trackers. Let me go back to the main screen to make it a big deal. Something I want to emphasize is hopefully you know a bit of linear algebra, because this won't make much sense otherwise. These average trackers don't really contribute new information. They are a linear combination. In other words, they're information comes from other trackers. There's nothing new, there's nothing independent happening here, right? Which means you can't really take 4 trackers and multiply them a bunch of times or average them a bunch of times until you have a bunch of trackers and then do a camera solve. You could kind of fiddle around with it and it would kind of work, but mathematically it doesn't make too much sense. So 1, they don't add new information, but 2, it doesn't mean that you can't like use this extrapolated information, that we're just extending it, right? There's no reason you can't use this in your camera solve to just say, oh, now we have a bunch of points to kind of outline our surface or stuff like this. But average trackers is super useful. It's a feature I guess just came out of nowhere. Like imagine you have 2 fingers. I don't want to move this hand too much, but imagine you have 2 fingers. Each one of these has a tracker, and you want to know exactly where the point in between of these is at any moment. Average trackers can do that. Before you had to do it with drivers, and you had to do the averages of XY coordinates yourself. So now you can have a midpoint, like you can have a card floating, and you always know exactly where the middle is, etc. So average trackers, that's what it is. I don't have much more to say about it because that's just what it does, and I'm going to use it in future tracking projects. Anyways, thanks for watching this tutorial. What's this on the right? Is it a list of tracker markers? No, it's a list of patrons. I know this was a quick one, but I just wanted to drop in a little Patreon thank you and a little Patreon advertisement. You guys aren't going to be fooled. I'm not just saying this like, oh, I'm a generous saint. No. Patreon exists. It's a place where you can get exclusive tutorials I don't post to either channel. Those exist there. Project files, probably this one once I'm done with it, this whole iPod thing. I'm going to be posting it. Additionally, early access, stuff like this. If you're interested in any of these things, Patreon, there's a link in the description. Otherwise, you've already clicked off, and then that's pretty much it. So thank you for watching. Hopefully you learned something about average trackers. I don't know if I just missed the mark on this one. I feel like it's a new edition, but whatever. I'll keep my eye on it, and hopefully that patch I was talking about gets introduced. Other than that, that's the essence of it. So without further ado, see ya. Bye-bye.